This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My guest today is Chrystal Rae. Chrystal, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Heather. It's such a pleasure.
It's my pleasure, totally. We met at the IANS conference, and for folks that don't know what that is, that's the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and Chrystal was a speaker there. And I also want to mention that Chrystal has a beautiful book that she's written, and we're going to talk more about that coming up. But Chrystal, at the conference, you shared your story of your near-death experience, some spiritual experiences, and I'd love you to share that with our audience. So maybe you could start with your childhood and then lead us right on into your spiritual experiences.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you for the invitation. And it was so nice to meet you there.
Thank you.
When I was at this conference and I met this beautiful woman named Heather, I was like, who is that? She has such a beautiful aura. So I'm really happy to be on your show. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, you are so welcome.
Yeah, so happy. So I do want to share, I did just complete a book, and this book that I wrote is called Love Letters to Your Soul. And it was a directive that was given to me when I was in an out-of-body experience during a near-death experience, which I'll get into. But basically, just want to state at the very beginning of this that my mission of coming back and embodying the physical existence again was to share the message that love is all that matters. And that has been my journey for the last 20-some years since I had this near-death experience. My story is, I think, a lot like many who've had near-death experiences. I had a very interesting childhood. I guess I would say it's a abnormal household in many ways in America. But my mom was an alcoholic and my dad was absent, and it was abusive and very strict and very abusive, like very physically abusive. But more importantly, I think it was the mental abuse, because a lot of times when people have some kind of addiction or a drinking problem or something of this sort, they kind of project that out onto their children. And so for me as a child, I never felt good enough. Doesn't matter what I did. If I made straight A's in school, my C in math was the only thing that was, which by the way, I did get C in math. My C in math was the only thing that mattered. And so it was a really, really challenging childhood. But it gave me a depth of character because I always, as a very young person, felt like the adult in the house, because I was already making dinner at 5 years old. I was doing things that most people would never do. I walked to school. I started working at, really young. I was selling flowers on the street in California, which is kind of crazy when you think about it nowadays. Like, that's just danger.
Absolutely.
But I picked weeds. I did all this. I was very industrious. I always wanted to have my own business, which, by the way, I have 3 yoga studios here in Dallas with a business partner called Gaia Flow Yoga. And they're a love-based practice, which is also a result of this near-death experience that I'm going to share with you. So, one of the mornings of my childhood that's most poignant and I think kind of directed the rest of my life was a particular morning when I was in bed and I could hear my mom kind of thundering down the hall. And I never knew what I had done wrong, but I knew that I had done something wrong. And so she came in and grabbed my hair and dragged me down the hallway and just kind of threw me in the kitchen. And she was screaming. It was like 6 a.m. I was shaking and cold and just afraid. I didn't know what I had done wrong. And then I looked up and I saw this black stain on the ceiling. And I had been told to clean that a week ago, but between all of my other chores and going to school and taking care of my little sister, cleaning up after my drunken mother, I was exhausted. I didn't do it. So she was like, I told you to do that a week ago and you never did it. And I'm tired of telling you, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, bless her heart, by the way, my sweet mother, she just had her own, karmic forces to work with. And she's now passed. So anyway, I got up on the counter and I remember just kind of being in a daze and just kind of questioning the meaning of life. And it was a really profound thought for a young child. I think it must have been. I'm not sure at that time if I was between 11 and 13, just kind of many years ago, but that's about the age. And I remember contemplating the meaning of life. And in our household, God, I always make the joke that God didn't exist in our household unless he was damned. So we didn't have like a context for a religious background or anything like that. But I had heard the stories of heaven and hell. And I remember thinking, you know, it seems like if you're going to be a good person to get to heaven, that's kind of corrupt. If you're going to be a good person to avoid going to hell, that's also corrupt. And I didn't really have the word corrupt, but that was what I was thinking. That's just not right. And I said, I just want to be a good person because that's who I am, because I am a good person. And that was like a light, Heather, went off. I was like I was just like, that means I am a good person. Like it hit me like my true desire was just to be a good person, but not to get to heaven, not to avoid hell.
Yes.
So then I started having this conversation with God. And I said, you know, if you exist, I want to know that you exist, but I don't want to know. And all the while I'm cleaning the ceiling, just cleaning the ceiling, cleaning the ceiling. I want to know you exist, but I want to know before I die, not after. I was very direct about it because I thought anyone could know you exist when they die. I want to know before, you
Right.
know. And so, and I said, and oh, by the way, if you could help my mom stop drinking, that would be good too. And in my little girl head, like that was even a more miraculous thing to help my mom stop drinking because I thought that was an impossibility than to prove to me that there was a God before I died. With that thought, I turned around and I walked off. It was about a 5-foot counter. And I walked off kind of in a daze and my head went tumbling towards the ground. And in that moment, there was 3 of me. I was the body falling towards the ground. I was the entity or soul entity that you might call that was within me. And I was also this dispassionate, all-knowing observer who was also me. So, and again, I had no context for any of this, but I saw myself falling through what you might think of as a tornado, but it was this whirling time and space that had no sound. And I was watching myself from above and I related with the entity that lived within my body or the soul essence. I was kind of a little weirded out from the all-knowing observer because it didn't sign up for my poor, pitiful me stories.
Ah, interesting.
And the body, of course, was just doing what the body was doing, which is falling through the ground. So I saw the ground about this close, and I never hit it, Heather. All of a sudden, I found myself floating in time and space, and there was lights, which were stars, and I had the sudden realization, like, this is time and space, and those are the stars, and that's what we are. We are energy. We are light energy. And boom, back in my body. But I was standing on my feet like a cat. You say you like cats, right?
I do.
You know, they always say a cat always lands on their feet. Well, I landed miraculously on my feet. So I, you know, in my confusion about what just happened, I was like, what just happened? And I thought, okay, your mind tries to rationalize. So I decided I must have fallen, hit my head, seen stars, had this really crazy experience, and then somehow got up and, you know, and figured it all out. So I went running to the bathroom and I said, well, if I fall and I stand up somehow, however miraculously I did that, I have to at least have a bruise or a bump or a scratch. Nothing. So I was like, oh my gosh, God saved me. So I called my brother. I was like, Mark, God saved me, which he started laughing because again, in our house, that wasn't common terminology. And so he was like laughing and he said I had lost it, that I needed to go I remember clearly that he said I needed a straight jacket, which made me laugh. And we ended up just laughing on the floor. And I said, it kind of hit me like, okay, I know this sounds weird, but I don't ever want to forget it. So I asked him, please, Mark, don't ever forget that I told you this, because 20 years, 30 years from now, I don't want to think it's a dream. And so kind of humorously, because my brother became a Christian minister, And so he is which he doesn't believe in anything that I believe in, which that we are the essence of love and light. He has a different path, which is fine. But he's the one who doesn't believe in this is the one that's my validation that it happened.
Interesting.
And so from that point on, I started going to Sunday schools because I had felt this immense love and this feeling of warmth and light and acceptance. And so I thought, well, I need to go to church. I read the Bible 7 times, backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards, because I figured if I read from the back to the front, then the front to the back. And, my mom thought I had lost my mind. I was calling Sunday school buses to pick me up. I was walking to Sunday school. I was baptized 5 times.
Wow.
Because I didn't feel it. I wanted to feel that same thing that I had felt in this out of body experience. And so I kept going to different churches. I went to Pentecostal. I went to lots of Christian churches. And they were all very loving and sweet, and the people were very kind, but it wasn't that unconditional love that I had understood to be me. And so finally I ended up going to what do you call it? Evangelistic preacher that puts his hands on you, kind of knocks you down. And so he did knock me down, by the way. You get in a line, you put his hands. But I immediately knew that it was hypnotism. And I got up and I was kind of angry. And I was like, that's not it. That's not love. That's not light. And he had me like ushered out of and then I kind of lost my way or my faith in any of this. And I also was at this point leaving home. I ran away at 17. I had a very, as I said, abusive home life that was just, it was just too much for a teenager. It was too much for my tender soul. And I knew that if I didn't leave, that I would die on the inside. So at 17, I had already done my research that I could leave at 17 without being put into like some kind of juvenile hole. And I jumped out the window. It was a really sad day because I left my 10-year-old sister. I was 17, she was 10, and I had been her primary caretaker because my mom really wasn't capable of it. And I left my dog hanging out the window. But, and I had like a little suitcase that had just, back then it was Farrah Fawcett. I had like, the blower and the hairspray and then my Cinderella pajamas and my little, jeans and t-shirt. And I felt like I was the most abundant person on the world because I was free. And I was working at First Cafeteria, had a boss who had invited me to come stay with her because she knew of my home situation. So I was very grateful and I went and stayed with her for some time until my life kind of figured out. And fast forward, getting to the point of our near death experience. I probably should mention though, when I was younger, I had a out of body experience, where my mom was forcing me to eat watermelon, which I don't like. And so I was just like cramming it in my mouth and I got one of the little black seeds, like big black seeds stuck in my throat. And I guess I turned blue and I passed out. And the next thing I knew, I saw myself from a distance, in an ambulance going to the emergency room, but I was floating up above and I was tethered by a light to the body. And I was watching myself. And I remember thinking, if I don't get back in that body, I will die, And I don't remember how or when I got back into the body, but I remember that thought. And then I was back in the body. So fast forward, I've had these 2 very interesting, profound experiences. So I always felt like I had a little bit of a edge on life because I knew the truth, because I knew that there was something extraordinary going on. There was something so radiant, so beautiful, so loving, so all-encompassing that I was always safe, even in a world that felt really unsafe. So I went, I moved out and I got into my own life. I, always wanted to be married and have children. I thought I'd have 6 children and I ended up having 6 pregnancies, but only 2 children survived because I wasn't able to carry children. My first marriage was a really hard marriage because we had different value systems and he's a really good guy, really good, father, but it wasn't necessarily a good husband. And I guess I probably wasn't a good wife for him, at least. So I ended up getting divorced at like 35. And again, it was because of the dark night of the soul that I felt like I was in this marriage. But if I stayed in this marriage, then part of me would die, like a radiant part of me, which I couldn't. And there was this feeling of like, the responsibility of not letting my children down. I mean, I had always said, I will never get divorced because I don't want to be my mother. Of course, never say never. And so I got divorced at like 35, and it was probably the darkest day of my life because I felt like I was Cinderella, but the glass slipper didn't fit. I had been discovered, My mom was right about me, like I am a failure, all that stuff. It was really hard. So fast forward, um, that year was really hard. I didn't date for a year and a half because I was like, I'm not ready to date. I think one time I went out with someone and I called him my ex-husband's name, which was not good.
No, that's not good.
Because I hadn't dated for like 13 years, so I didn't even know how to date. So I went on this trip with a gentleman who was really nice, and I asked if I could bring my cousin. I'm 35. It's so funny, as a chaperone. So I don't know why this is making me cry. It's really funny.
Oh, it's hard. It's hard revisiting a lot of this.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people can relate to when they look back on their pasts.
It's so true. Those poignant moments in your life. Mm-hmm. So I went on this trip, and I wasn't really into this guy, and she wasn't really into being there either. And so we said we would go home early. And on the way back to the airport, it was all very friendly. I just said, hey, I don't think I was ready to date. I should go back. And he said, yeah, I think you should go back. And on the way back, going up a mountain, heading to the airport, which we should have been going down a mountain, but anyway, that's another story. I think he took a wrong turn, and somehow we ended up going up the mountain. And the car came, and it was snowing, blizzardy. We were in Vail. We were in a little red Jeep. And this little Jeep had just like a plastic top and like a roll bar, and that was it. Carmen was in the back, my cousin was in the back, and I was in the front with this gentleman. And a car came down the mountain. We were going up. We started to like hydroplane, I guess, and turn around, and the car couldn't stop and hit my side of the car of the Jeep. And in that moment, I remember just everything slowing down, like time didn't really exist. Everything just became very still. And it was as though I was watching everything. And I remember looking back at my cousin, and she was screaming, and I had never seen such fear on anyone's face. And I looked over at the guy driving, and he was completely in a state of hysteria as well. And I was in this calm, like peaceful center because I had no fear of death because of previous things I've told you about. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't know I was going to die today. Like it was like, oh, I didn't know I was going to die today. Like I thought, and of course, the remorse of having children and all of this. And I was like, but then I just resigned myself to, and I kind of just softened in. And in that moment, I was in this beautiful, radiant light. Meanwhile, we had been hit, spun off the cliff. We fell. I had been saying 25 feet, but I had talked to my cousin the other day, and she said it was actually 80 feet.
Wow.
We fell 80 feet, which is even more incredible. And then we flipped 10 times. And in that span of that, I came out of my body, and there was this being of light, and I could just say being of light because it wasn't a physical body, but it was this all-encompassing, warm, embracing presence. And comforting me as I was shown my panoramic life review, which was really interesting because not only was I shown forward, I was shown backwards, sideways, every way that my life had affected the universe in the most intricate ways that you couldn't even get it all into a computer, how many details I was shown. And I was shown that my every kind or unkind act rippled out for all of eternity. And I was shown how a kind act, I was shown how it affected someone. It was so beautiful though, because not only was I shown how it affected them, but I was shown that as them, and then I was shown as their children and their children and their children. So this ripple of love that went out forever is so beautiful. And the opposite was also quite horrifying when you see how an unkind act could really hurt someone for generations. But there was great compassion. It wasn't like you were being judged. It was more like you were just being shown with, with a mirror, just so you could have awareness, but not to be judged or not to be condemned, not even to be glorified, truthfully. There was no like, this is great and that's bad. It was just like, this is it. This is what it is. This is what your life represents. And you get to make those decisions of like whether it's good or bad, and there was just great compassion. So I had this like crazy panoramic view. And again, it was most poignant things of your life, which you might not even recognize, because I think most people put into the context of poignant things, they put into the context of like, getting a degree, making a lot of money, having a business, this and that.
Exactly.
But it was like this kind act you show to a stranger. The most poignant thing you've done in your life. It's like, what? So it was so beautiful. And then I was shown that I had a lot of destinies that were available to me. One of which I could die or leave the planet. I could come back and have some debilitating ailments, mental deficiencies, being a wheelchair, all this different options, many, many options, not just those just very subtle options of different options of like coming back. I was also shown that if I chose to leave the planet, which was really surprising to me, and I think for a lot of mothers, it'd be surprising. Because I mean, one of my fears, as soon as I thought, oh, I didn't know I was going to die today, was I didn't know that my life did not directly impact the soul of my children. Like I thought I was like essential to my children's path. And I was shown that if I were to choose to leave, that they would be okay. In fact, I was shown that they both went through school, graduated, got married, had children. And I was like so shocked. I was like, what? Without me? Like their life was fine without me. And then I was poignantly told this: each soul is here for the bliss of its own existence. And I never knew that, Heather, because based on my childhood and my failed marriage, life had just been a burden and a heavy backpack. I did not know we were here for bliss. I was like, bliss? Are you kidding me?
That's hard to see.
Yeah. And I didn't have like a super bad life. Like I know people who've had really, really tragic lives, and mine was relatively difficult, but in context of what I've seen other people go through, it was pretty easy. And so I was really surprised that my kids were going to be okay without me, but it was comforting at the same time.
Right.
So in other words, I was also given the choice, like, you don't have to be here to help your children. Like your children are going to find their way. So the choice to stay back here was a different choice. And they were shown that there was one reality, which is the reality which I'm embodying right now, where I would come back and write this book that I told you about earlier, which, by the way, took me a long time to write, because I was told to write and tell the world from my poetic and pragmatic perspective. I wasn't given those words at that time, but that's what I understood, that love is all that matters. And I remember talking to the light going, well, wait a minute, you got the wrong girl here. Like, I'm not the love girl. I'm not the one to talk about love, because, I felt so unlovable. And all my relationships had ended in disaster. I was like, how? So anyway, I was shown that because I had the ability to love so deeply, that I was supposed to share this message. So it took me 20 years to be ready to even talk about it.
And you represent all those other people that feel unworthy of that love and demonstrate that you can get to that.
Right. And I think there's a shared humanity there, because we've all had our own individual dark night of the soul. It might not look like my dark night, but everyone has had that. So I was so happy to come back and write the book. Like that kind I didn't go, oh no, I want to stay here. Like I've heard some other people say they didn't want to come back. I was and I wasn't really even coming back from my children, though I love my children with all my heart. my true joy of coming back was to write this book and to be this ambassador of light, is what I feel like I am, truthfully, as an ambassador of light that has a message of love, to tell the world that indeed love is the only thing that matters. And it took me, again, so many years to be able to stand up and do this. But even on our yoga studio with my business partner, who, by the way, had a really critical car crash in the same year, in the same month as me, but we didn't know each other back then.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes, it's very crazy.
Our studios that we have as a slogan is called Love is Why. And people always ask, well, why what? And why everything? Love is why we're here, why we exist. It's the answer to everything. And love, from my definition of love, is not necessarily this solely romantic version of love, but I was shown that love is the pure light of undifferentiated consciousness, which is a direct quote, by the way, from Ramana Maharishi, in his small book, Who Am I? He's a really great spiritual master who's no longer on the planet. But so as I went on my journey of, if I'm going to write a book about love, then I really need to understand what that means beyond what I've experienced as love. And so I was drawn to this book, and this one of the disciples asked Ramana Maharishi, what is Master, what is love? And he said, and he had had a near-death experience at 17 years old. And he said, love is the pure light of undifferentiated consciousness. And that one sentence, Heather, changed the rest of my life, because I always challenge anyone and everyone, can you give me a better definition of love? And no one has ever been able to do it. I would gladly take it if it was there, but there's no other, I haven't found a better definition of love. So when I break it down, like love is the pure light, I know for sure that that's what we are, energy. Undifferentiated consciousness, meaning that there is no other. There's just one. And that pure light is untarnished. And so one of the things I was shown is that unlike many religious beliefs, is what you do on this planet is not going to take you to heaven or to hell. It is, you create your own heaven and hell. You are loved unconditionally, no matter what. And the great love is that we're given free will to choose, our own life. And it's such a great joy. And even if we choose to go down into a dark tunnel before we, make our way back up, it's not that we are lesser as a result of that. And I believe that we all go through so many different iterations of self before we find our way back to the loving arms of our creator, divine light, or God, however you want to call it. And I think our purpose in life is literally to experience the shadows and light of this world in the way that only we can, and find our way back to love. And as we do, we enhance the whole of humanity and the whole of the universe. And in fact, we even bless the very origins of our beginnings, meaning our creator, with the information that can only be garnered through us. So I was shown that, if you will, just for lack of better words, that if God were to burst into particles of light, one of those would be you, and another would be me, and another would be everyone else in the world and everything. And they burst out for the joy of their own existence, only to come back with all this consciousness or conscious information that only can be garnered by that particular life stream in that particular way, in that particular time and space. And that together makes the whole of humanity and part of the greater universe and part of the greater existence of all that is, or God. And so I was shown all of this in the span of such minutes and many years to unravel it all. Because again, when I came out of the car wreck, I had these miraculous things happen to me that I could not understand because I hadn't really had a context for it. First of all, I didn't have the religious context, but I also didn't have the kind of groovy spiritual stuff. Like I had no idea what an aura is. And, I hadn't heard of clairaudience or clair anything. So when they pulled us out of the car wreck, and I ended up at the hospital, and there was a really angry nurse, male nurse, and he started screaming at me and saying that, we had been drinking or doing drugs, and that my cousin, who was unconscious and had brain damage basically, was going to die, and that the person who came in yesterday, it was just this horrible attack on me. And I said, I wasn't drinking. I don't drink. I've never drank. I don't drink. And then he grabbed my arm, and when he did, I saw this vision of him beating his girlfriend. or his wife or somebody. And I was like it was like way too much information. It was like a door had opened. And then I ran into where Carmen was on this emergency room, and I just touched her leg, and I felt this like energy move through me out my hand and kind of ripple through her body, and I was like, oh, she's going to be fine. Like I knew she was going to be fine. It wasn't like I was healing her per se,
Okay.
but I was energized. I was like an energy and a consciousness that I understood that she was going to be fine. And in fact, they told me that very small chance that she would survive. And if she did, she'd have 90% brain damage and she would be a vegetable for the rest of her life, probably living in a coma. And I also knew in that instant that that was not true. While in fact, Karma, she told me later she had 3 beings of light by her side. And, and after many operations, this and that, a really hard back, 2 weeks after the accident, I went to visit her. She was in a coma, and she was this beautiful clarinetist for the Dallas Opera, and she was so gorgeous. She had like doe skin and big brown eyes, and she was just this beautiful woman. And I walked in, and truthfully, Heather, it scared me because she was swollen. Her teeth were all crushed. Her eye sockets were crushed, and it did not look like cousin Karma. So I remember thinking, this is your cousin Karma, and you love her. And so I just calmed my energy down, and I went over and I touched her again. And this is kind of scary, I guess, for some people, but she like opened her eyes and sat up. And she told me, Chrystal, I'm in the light. I'm gleaming. I've never been so radiant. I'm a star. And with that, she went back to sleep. And like everybody in the room was like, what just happened? Her mother, the doctor. And nobody was happy about me being there because they all kind of blamed me. They invited me not to come back and visit Karma. I wasn't even the driver. I just invited her.
Right.
But anyway, it didn't really matter. That one thing ties back to my childhood. If you remember, Heather, that when I fell out of my body was a little girl falling off the counter. I went into time and space, and I saw that what we are is energy. And my last words is that I'm a star. And so full circle,
Right.
some almost 30 years later, Karma's telling me I'm in the light, I'm gleaming, I've never been so radiant, I'm a star.
Wow, clearly a message meant to tie all this together.
So back to the car wreck. Then I came out of that for about 2 weeks after. I just kind of sat in my room, curled up in a ball because I didn't want to see anybody because, again, I didn't have a context for this, but I could feel their feelings. I knew their thoughts. I knew how much fear humanity has. I could just feel the fear in everyone and their hidden secrets and their lies. And it was just so hard to walk around and be in public. It was hard. And I know I didn't really have a context for any of this. I know now, like light was hard on my eyes. Like it was light, noise. I've never really liked it ever since I was a child. Like I wasn't one to go to concerts. I never liked crowds. It was always, my life is extroverted because I own studios. I present daily, classes. I teach 300, 500 hour level big trainings, but I'm actually an introvert. It's kind of funny. My real beingness is I like sanctuary and I like, So after that, then I just started on my journey of, okay, if I'm going to write a book about love, then I'm going back to college, which I had never gone to. Because when I was a kid, what I really wanted was I wanted to model and I wanted to have a family. I wanted to have many children, be married. But now I was divorced, post near death. And so my former husband was on the board of a local college. And so the very next day I was sitting in school.
Wow.
And the first thing they said is scientists have now discovered that there's no empty space in the universe. And they had just discovered dark matter. And I was like, of course, I knew that when I was a kid because I saw that everything is energy and that we're all connected.
Made a lot of sense.
So that was another sign for me that, So after taking 2 preliminary math classes, I ended up graduating cum laude. And I did write a book, which was my thesis, my honors thesis when I was in college. And it was more of a book about my childhood. And I always have these really cool messages, synchronicities from the universe. So I was just about to publish this book, and I went to see a Sufi, they call him a Sufi master, last living Sufi master. And I found it fascinating because this man was able to stop his heart for 45 minutes, which I thought, well, that's worthy of my hour of my time. I want to go meet this man who can stop this. So he had been at Yale and different really prestigious colleges, and they had studied him because he was able to do this. So I walked in this little cafe called the Cosmic Cup here in Dallas. I don't think it's even exists anymore, and I remember there was all these people, and I think I told you I don't really like crowds. So there was all these people all hovered around him. It was a small room, and there was about 100 people in there. And so I said, I'm just gonna sit back here at the back of the room and listen. And he had this turban on, and he was old guy, and he was screaming kind of loud. And then all of a sudden he said, and you, come here. And I was like, me? And so I'm like, okay. So, and then I came up to him and he whispered in my ear. He said, don't tell anyone about your childhood until you're famous. And the first thing I thought was, cool, I'm going to be famous.
Of course.
And then secondly, I was like, I had just finished this book. And truthfully, it was really a book that was quite dark, not very much light in there, because it was a healing book where I kind of went from talking about my childhood from the perspective of the little girl and really diving into those deep emotions. And then as the mature woman, how those lessons had served me. But it was a really heavy, heavy book. And so I put the book away, and I decided that I would wait till later to publish that book. And then I decided I would start writing the book that I was instructed to write, which is to tell the world that love is all that matters. And that's the book that I'm just publishing now. So it's on Amazon, and I'm going to do the audio as well, because I really believe that there's a resonance to our voice that's healing. And some of my favorite teachers, I enjoy just listening to them read their own book, not necessarily a narrator, but to hear the voice and to hear the sincerity.
I agree.
The power of that energy that's transmitted through the voice. So I have a really good guy here that I'm working with. So it'll also be out soon in the audio, but for now it's coming out in the hardback and soft cover on Amazon. And you have a copy of it right there.
I do have it right here. And I'm so glad it's coming out as an audiobook, because I like audiobooks. I actually love audiobooks. So I will be very excited to hear that. And I'm glad it's in your own voice. I want to talk more about the book. I've got lots of questions about your near-death experience, but let's go ahead and take that into part 2.
Okay. All right. It was so nice to meet you.
It's so fabulous.
Time with you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you, and we've got much more to talk about. Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.